I'm very excited about our next guest. He's coming from the UK. We just came from Basel, Switzerland, and now we are back at the UK. And we have Rakesh Patel here with us. I'll do a brief introduction on Rakesh, who has a wonderful background, and he'll talk more about that during his presentation. He's an avid technologist by mind, and though a people person at heart. He's passionate about innovation, coding, and engineering geek stuff. He is an eternal student, a knowledge sponge, and a bad dad joke teller. So I could not ask for more, Rakesh. We're so excited to have you here with us. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and expertise with our global audience today.
Thank you so much, Jose. 64.2 zettabytes. Can you imagine how big a number that is? Well, I can tell you. It's 64 with 21 zeros behind it. So large that if you were to stack these USB sticks on top of each other, they'd go to Mars and back. Well, actually, I kind of made up that data because I couldn't be bothered typing 21 zeros in Excel, but I think it's pretty large anyway. So welcome to my talk, Data as a First-Class Citizen in the Enterprise. So I'm going to share my screen now. I hope you can all see that. So I'm Rakesh Patel, and it's customary, I believe, for us at least to introduce ourselves. Sorry, I think something went a little bit wrong there. I think I'm back again, right. So it's customary for us to introduce ourselves. So I'm Rakesh Patel, and I'm an enterprise architect by trade. Although I do a number of other things. I'm an angel investor. I've had a couple of entrepreneurial endeavors myself, and I'm a board advisor for a number of companies, a med tech company, a finance company, and a couple of others. I also really enjoy development. I'm a C#, Java, Python, C++ sort of guy. I do enjoy dabbling in databases, and I very much revel in all of my badges. I hope you can see them all there. There's so many of these qualifications I've amassed. So you would think, with all those qualifications, that I'd be perhaps a little bit more diligent with my advice, but my typical day as a technologist looks like this: a lot of cut and pasting from Google, a small amount of data science and stats and all that kind of really intelligent stuff, and some basic arithmetic. And I'm always on digital advisory boards, and this is how it looks generally. I kind of go in with a balloon and a CD and say, this is how we get to the clouds. Joking aside, I've had 26 years of privileged life in technology. So I've worked in many industries: aviation, in banking, in commerce, e-commerce that is, and also a couple of stints at Domino's Pizza, for example, which was a lot of fun, and also in a number of other retailers like Tesco's in England, which is a bit like Walmart. So I've had a large breadth of experience, and somehow they've kept me on board, so I'm not sure what's going on there. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about data as a first-class citizen. Now, I'm guessing some of you out there are thinking, well, what is a first-class citizen and what's that got to do with data? Well, I'm going to hope to demystify some of that. I'm also going to share with how we can implement some of the things that I'm going to hopefully influence you on, and present that there could be good ideas for the enterprise. Now, I've tailored this presentation not for developers, even though I really enjoy if statements and loops and C# and C++. I'm going to make this a little bit more palatable for just the general population out there who understands enterprise. And of course, it's not to belittle all you really intelligent and sophisticated people, but just to make it more palatable for us, I'll tune it so it's not just for developers. Now, this is the biggest problem that's out there. Now, I started industry back in 1994 or thereabouts, although I'm not a patch over 25. Anyway, that's another story. But back in those days, garbage in and garbage out was a big deal. We used to look after our data and really try to analyze what it was gathering. And also, in that case, we knew that what was coming out would be reasonably useful. But of course, as the world goes on, we've got so much data, as I mentioned, 64.2 zettabytes of this stuff. So we can't keep up, can we? I'm not saying, of course, that it's all garbage coming in, but certainly machine learning and AI helps us to disseminate that information and add a little bit more value to it. But nonetheless, should we be thinking about what comes in the first place? I think we should. So what are the challenges? Well, I've talked about data explosions. We know only too well that it's only going to get larger and larger. But also we have a whole bunch of competing conventions, methodologies, one of them being agile, of course, and the other being microservices, where the enterprises, of course, are thinking about moving very quickly because they have to, of course. This is the way that the world is going. And we can't always think about the bigger picture, can we? And that causes a lot of problems with garbage in, garbage out. Are we collecting the right amount of data, and is it accurate? What does that column mean? Well, I came up with this because, like many of you, I'm sure, or it just could be me, I've sat in countless enterprise architecture meetings, and I've been given a spreadsheet or perhaps some data to look over, and I really don't know what the columns mean. They will have acronyms, and they're industry specific sometimes, or perhaps someone's just made them up. I'm not sure. But occasionally, I must admit, I've just pretended to know what they mean. I'm sure some of you would know that story. So what is a first-class citizen? Well, I think we've got enough border control issues at the moment, haven't we, with COVID and all these issues about getting across borders. And of course, we've had Brexit in the UK. Don't get me started on that. So here I am talking about first-class citizens. And I also promised you that I wouldn't talk about development field, but I'm going to have to a little bit. What it is an entity that supports all of the operations that are available to other entities. Yeah, what does that mean? Well, in programming, it means that we have constructs like classes, perhaps, or methods. That doesn't really matter too much, but they're all of the same level. In other words, we can do a lot with those, and we don't decipher between them. So is data really like this in an enterprise? Is it a first-class citizen? So one of the ways we can answer that is by looking at some simple screen here. We've got an app here, very badly drawn, but anyway, I think you get the idea. And we have an Excel sheet. So this is taken from my days working in a very well-known pizza place called Domino's. Had a lot of fun over there. When I first took on the contract, I think I weighed somewhere like 74 kilos, and then successfully I managed to put that weight up onto about 84 kilos because of all the amazing pizzas that they would give on demos to all the suppliers that would come in. But anyway, there's a lot of acronyms. What is NAF inflow, for example? What is a quality score? What is the year-to-date excluding EPS versus marketing? So there's a lot of jargon that's out there in the enterprise that we don't always know the meaning of. And notice here, in this particular example, which is quite classical, it doesn't have any help either to tell you what that is. Now, typically, we could go and ask our colleagues, we could ask perhaps some data people in the enterprise, but really, how many of us do have that data dictionary that tells us what all this information means? More still, we have these entity relationship diagrams in databases. You don't need to understand all of this, but it's pretty simple that an order would have a customer and the order would have many detail items and so on and so on. But if you look carefully, they're just all names in columns on entities. It still doesn't really tell you exactly what it means. That lives in our minds, that lives in the enterprise, and that lives in the expertise of the business itself. But it's certainly not captured there. It might be by data analysts, it might be by developers who keep notes of these things, but it's certainly not a first-class type of element free in the enterprise. It's not defined anywhere. Reality, we have thousands of entities in enterprise, horrid as it sounds, but probably maybe tens of thousands in some others. So why data as a first-class citizen? Well, knowledge is power, and power, of course, comes from innovation and it needs fuel, and that tends to be the knowledge in the enterprise. And where does that come from? A lot of it comes from data these days. So to understand data is not just to understand the values that are in there, but to understand what exactly that column means in the first place, what that property means. How does it relate to other properties? Where do we look this stuff up? It gives us strategic advantage. So if data is freely available throughout the organization and the metadata behind that, it can give us a strategic advantage because we're all singing from the same hymn sheet. We're able to look up what something means, not just the value that was given to us. And of course, using all of those tools, we can get to that speed of market position that we would really enjoy to keep us in our share schemes that are very bountiful when we retire, I hope. So how do we cope? Well, we need to reduce this border control around data citizenship. We need to make it truly first class. I know I haven't got quite onto that. It might be a little bit elusive, but it will come clear soon. Technology can be very basic or comprehensive around making data first-class citizen. We'll come on to that shortly. It can be as easy as just having an Excel sheet that doesn't really tell you what the values are classically, but it will tell you what the meaning of the columns are. I'll show you that in just a second. They can go all the way over to really comprehensive custom-made tools, which I've been involved with a lot, and I'll share some of that with you. And it can also be the tools that are out there on the market. The tools that are out in the market are called master data management tools. There's quite a few of those, and they do ultimately solve some of the issues I'm talking about, but not all of them. We'll see why in a moment. So here is metadata describing data. Now, I'm sure some of you have already seen this type of setup in different flavors and guises that I'm sure that you have in your organization. So at the top here, we have entity, which just means something in the business of importance. I chose pizzas because we tend to all enjoy those and we understand. So we've got customer here, we have store, we have pizza, which is pretty obvious stuff, but is it really? I mean, what actually is a customer? Could it be the franchisee who buys the pizzas for his store? Or could it be the customer who actually eats those pizzas from the franchisee? So even there are some nuances. And of course, we have a store. Now, if we look over here, we have has duplicates and some rules. So there are some basic fundamental business properties around a pizza and around a store and around a customer. But where do they live? I've been in countless meetings in some wonderfully sophisticated enterprises, and it's hard to find this one master set of truth. Certainly, I could go out to my stakeholders and compile such a list, but where do they go to find their list from other stakeholders? It does manifest itself into lots of problems. But nonetheless, something like small like this as a spreadsheet could really help. Of course, each of those entities will have properties. We have on the second grid there, name, code, discount level, and they have their own nuances. Apart from what type of data it is it a letter, is it a number, how many letters, and so on, they would also have rules behind them. And they're also terribly important. For example, discount level here can only be from 1 to 16. And if you're a store that's only traded for 2 years or less, you can only be graded with a discount level of 3. Now, of course, this information is incredibly fundamental to the organization. And it should be everywhere. It should be treated as a first-class citizen. But in order to do that, it's not always easy, because these things live on spreadsheets, they live on people's desks, usually in handwritten notes like myself, or sometimes in Word documents, but usually they're in the culture and the ethos of the jargon in the industry itself, but certainly they're not always apparent and transparent as they are on this very small spreadsheet over here. Small time for a joke. 3 database admins walk into a NoSQL bar. A little while later, they walk out because they couldn't find a table. I mean, I've been a database developer for years and I still can't get the hang of NoSQL, but I certainly enjoy a small dad joke. Sorry about that. So we turn to master data management. So this does aim to solve some of these problems. There's lots of tools out there that we can use to take that master data in the company, all those entities, all those properties, and stash them into an all-encompassing database of sorts and provide that out to all of our levels in industry below us and in the enterprise. Some of this can be quite difficult to populate because it's hard, especially in large organizations, for everyone to agree on all the attributes of a store or a customer. People like Salesforce, of course, come along and tell us that we can model it differently in different departments, and that adds extra flexibility. But with that comes the balance of what is the one area of truth. And because of that notion, we have master data management that allows us to take feeds from all of these different disparate places and put them into one pot. As you can see here, that go across the entire organization. There are a number of tools out there that you can use, that enterprises do use. I'm quite an Oracle expert, really, so I've been using that a lot myself in those advisory sessions that I alluded to earlier on in my presentation. But of course, there's lots of others, Pimcore, IBM, for example, and Informatica. There's a whole bunch of SAP. You may have come across all of those, and they attempt to be able to capture this data. Now, the issue that I have seen in the industry is that a lot of these tools don't allow the culture of the company to change. No doubt they allow us to capture some of the master data. No doubt they allow us to perhaps model that in a more sophisticated fashion. But what about the culture of the company itself? Do they embrace data in its first-class form? Not just the values, as I said, but the actual attributes around that. Do they speak the language of data? Can they understand ERD diagrams, for example? Can they use those to provide relationships between entities and find new and invigorating ways to capture and use that data? Well, the answer is it's very difficult because not everyone has that background in data and not everybody sees the same amount of metadata. So my advice, and these are the things that I've done in industry, is to educate, of course, and to help and to support all those stakeholders that you're delighted to be working with, and ask them to contribute all of their knowledge, if they so wish, into formats that allow us to capture the meaning of that data. Now, as I said, that could be in spreadsheets, it could be in an MDM, but realistically, the best tools that I've used have been custom made, and they're pretty straightforward. It's just to have a set of entities and a set of properties and put into those two different groups all of the different rules and meanings and understandings of data. But the real key comes to this, is that people need access to it, especially in large organizations. You tend to find different silos of developers and projects working, I wouldn't say totally isolated, but quite rightfully in their own service that they're providing, especially with microservices. And there isn't this overarching governance generally that allows them to access this meaning of data. One of the things that we've done in the Met Police is provide a department that not really governance, but it allows people to approach them and have the meaning of their data represented in some custom applications that we use. And that allows everyone to get into this app using an intranet and be able to understand the glossary of terms and actually contribute to them. But one more step we do as well is that across many of the applications that we provide links across every field where they can click, and it will go off to this one repository of truth allow them to understand what that is and who the owner of that is, in fact. So the metadata itself becomes part of the application. And because it became part of the application, it also became quite niche in the culture. And it came from the niche and it went on to become more integrated. And that was actually part of the process. So when I go to stakeholder meetings now, it can be a lot easier because people are able to access this one repository and be able to contribute and shape how that actually looks. Now, if I move along to citizenship and data and see what's out there in the market, we have some fundamentally huge shifts in the companies that provide us tools with that. We have the great people at Splunk, for example, who can take some of our unorganized data and then reorganize it and provide us extra value and metrics and AI and machine learning and really demonstrate to us the true value of that data. But also, if you work with these organizations, they can help you to shape what your data should be looking like in the first place. And that's not something that's always been promoted, especially in enterprise architecture, is to bring some of that knowledge that's been outsourced back in-house and fuel that and use that to invigorate and enrich the data repositories that we already know and love in the organization. So I hope that's giving you a good insight into data citizenship. It's not always an easy concept to understand because it's a little bit of a programming term, but really the metadata around data is so valuable. It is essentially the knowledge of the organization. The more that it can be integrated and treated equally and rightfully as the values of the data itself, the more the organization can knowledge can prosper and really fuel innovation. And it allows people to go into meetings and be confident that they understand the true meaning of that and not do what I do, which is just to pretend sometimes. And back in the old days where you could get away with doodling, you would do that. So I've cut this presentation a little bit early, but that gives us an opportunity for questions. So if you have any, please fire them over to Jose. If you want to reach out to me, you can find me at my LinkedIn address, which I'll put on the screen just now. And my email address is there too. So I hope you've enjoyed that presentation, and it's just giving you a small insight into data citizenship as being first class, but also just reiterating the fact how important metadata of data can be. So thank you.
Thank you, Rakesh. Excellent. I will keep an eye on the questions here, so feel free to keep typing questions as we carry on the conversation with Rakesh here with the time that we have. Rakesh, I'll ask you to stop sharing the presentation screen so that the audience can see us big on the
That's
screen.
better.
Excellent. And you know, it's interesting that you talked a lot about you talked about the old school, you know, garbage in, garbage out for data. And in the world of big data, sometimes, you know, you're not getting a whole lot more. Less can be more in a lot of different contexts, and there's something to be said about small data and the right quality, sample size collected the right way. How do you work that in with the approach that you have with the cross-industry organizations you work with, meaning that it's not a decision, it's not really a question that big data is good or bad or small data is good or bad, but it's really depending on the context and the quality that you can have. You know, you know, either one can provide great insights. How do you approach that with organizations? Because, you know, sometimes more is really not adding to the quality of your analysis.
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. Thanks for that. Yeah, very intriguing question. So look, a lot of it comes down to just how you connect with your fellow humans. A lot of big data obviously goes with the volume that's there, but also big figures just emotionally attract larger audiences, and you kind of think it will lead to larger profits. But usually the devil's in the detail in most of that. So I tend to approach it pragmatically. I look at what the small nuances are in a particular vertical or a particular domain. And usually you'll find specialists, business specialists in those areas that will champion some of those small things. It could be very small. Like if I go back to the Domino's example, they enjoy making dough. Who doesn't make dough and not enjoy it? Well, I do. And they had a missing dough report. And this was all to do with, well, how much dough is missing? And we can kind of work out what the wastage is, and we can work out if there's any theft and that sort of thing. And it's just one column inside an entity, but it can really change everything. So they will sort of guesstimate this, for example, and that sort of thing, and it wouldn't be so apparent. But if you have enterprise architects who can really champion the small nuances and the meaning of that, that can manifest itself into larger returns in the end, and it certainly did for that pizza company. So I think it's a bit of both. You have to balance it with your human connection, and you really have to dig deep to work out that modeling and see if that would actually fit into the wider context.
That is such great insight. And by the way, the dad jokes, they did well. I mean, the audience enjoy your dad jokes. You see, I think we're the right age group. Our kids do not appreciate us as much as the folks about our age.
Yeah.
I'll add to that, to your comment, that I've done a lot of work in my career in the engineering and science and kind of industry. And often big data doesn't help us very much there, because there are some specific sources that we need in specific ways. And I had one example that I was working with a very large power company, where one day they sent me 18,000 rows of data on something, on a piece of equipment, on a large power producing facility, as an example. And they had collected that over 9 months. And I looked at it, and I did some analysis on it, and it was mostly garbage, because the way that there was a lot of automated data that was created by the facility that was within a range that was very controlled on purpose, because you're running a facility and you want to keep it controlled. But because the fact that it was so tightly controlled, it basically said that input did not affect the output.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that it didn't affect. It just means that for 9 months you control that so well that there is no impact. And you can send me 50 million pieces of data, it's not going to show me anything more than that. Yes. So we needed, instead of 18,000 data points, we actually needed 8 data points where they varied the input quite a bit. And then from those 8 data points, we created this amazing model of the entire system. But again, to your point there, that on the Domino's as well, that this, it's about understanding the business process that you're dealing with and the context of the application. On this now, you talk about data citizenship, which is I think there is an intuitive appeal to what you discuss here. I think it's not known by maybe half of our audience, and maybe the other half is not something they're familiar with. The question that I see as a theme related to data citizenship is the question of governance for data, and how does governance matches with data citizenship? How does that work?
Yeah, the two are so crucially linked together. So the enterprises that I've been fortunate enough to work for have embraced this on various levels. As time goes on, data has become so valuable that there's not many organizations that would discount the value of it. But as you rightly pointed out on your previous reference, is that big data just sometimes just adds more obfuscation than clarity to it. So really it comes down to this, is that in order for data citizenship to work, you really need to have the right tools in the organization for it to be put out there and marketed. So lots of enterprises will have hundreds of internal apps. You just can't count them on your fingers. It'd be more like how many you can put onto this disk here. But really, if you look at the number of entities that are out there, there aren't always that many that are key. So for Domino's, it would be stores and pizzas and customers, and for British Airways, who I work for, will be aircraft and tickets, and of course all the equipment that are on there. But around that, there'll be a whole bunch of metadata, and each department will have their own flavor for it. So the key, I think, is for the organization to embrace that, but not in a governance. I think that word sometimes just wreaks havoc with people. It reminds me of being at school and somebody checking your grammar and so on. And I don't want to be the enterprise architect that comes along and says, look, I'm the governor here. Your data's not quite right. No, it's a shared knowledge, it's a shared quorum. I mean, we have Wikipedia we go all out to in Google, and it's kind of like one element of truth, but it's crowdsourced, right? That's what makes it so cool and unique. So if organizations were to brace that type of philosophy and have some kind of glossary, however they want to term it, and allow people to contribute to that freely and be able to reference it, this is really key. It could be in your spreadsheet where you've got columns. On top of the column, sometimes you put a description of what that column means, right? So in there, you could put a link to your corporate Wikipedia. And I think the beauty really comes from there is to use technology and make it so it's crowdsourced, not so much governed by one particular place, and allow that cultural shift then to gradually manifest itself through the organization. And hopefully you got some cool speakers, maybe some funny people that can come along and make it sound a bit more appealing than governance.
Very good. Yes, that's an excellent point. Rakesh, a different question that has emerged has to do with a bit of a paradox of digital transformations. They have accelerated, and they were accelerating before the pandemic, and then the pandemic hit, and then they went into overdrive, right? They really accelerated. There was this big migration to digital technologies, and then people honestly, people start talking about every time you use a digital technology somewhere, they start saying that there's a digital transformation going on,
Yeah.
which is a topic on its own. But if we may as it be, we have now some track record of digital transformations that have been happened for 5 years to 10 years even, or even longer than that. But if we look at what has been happening in the last 5 years or so, what we also have seen is not an acceleration of digital transformation, but also an acceleration of failure of digital transformations to reach their desired outcomes. And you can, depending on the source you look, the numbers can be anywhere from 50 to 80% plus of failures. As a leader and practitioner in the field, working with multiple organizations, business models, and industries, what do you see as the maybe potential root causes for this failed digital transformations? What are some of the things that you think that organizations, even with good intentions, they implement these things with good intentions, but they are not really delivering on the outcomes that they expected? What do you think is behind that?
Yeah, there's always a number of things that are circling behind that. I mean, one of the things I can think of, there's probably not enough free pizza. Free pizza fuels everything, and clearly you get better results with
That
people
is
that are
for
happily
sure.
fed. But joking aside, yeah, I've been involved with my fair share of failures. I don't mind to admit that, and a lot of it comes down really to, again, the human element of it all. Like, to understand what the end goal of a digital transformation is to understand what the people want to have delivered. What kind of goals do they actually need? Sometimes the technologists, and I'm guilty of this, you just want to build something cool. You want to use the next new technology, and you just want to data the heck out of it, and use machine learning and AI and all that sort of good stuff. But really, is that going to be a strategic advantage? What does it add really that you couldn't have found out maybe with some basic calculations and so on? So I think it's a case of being honest, sitting with stakeholders, and really just understanding what motivates them, what motivates the team, what then is the end result for the company. Work backwards. It's not always easy to look at it in that sense, but it's certainly the right thing to do. And then from there, you don't need as many people then to figure out the exact details of how that works. I've often found that in large organizations, sometimes there's a tendency to overhire, and we have lots and lots of people that are chief of this or director of that. And of course, when that happens, there's lots of people underneath generally, and then it's really quite hard to get consensus.
Yeah.
But I think what's really worked well for me is proof of concepts, small ones that lead on to sort of larger ones, And they really can add a lot of dimension to lots of talking in meetings. If there's a focal point to be had on the screen and it's working, that is so much more influential, especially across large teams, to become successful afterwards, because it's iterative at that point. You've built something that people hopefully have championed on slowly but surely and got to the end result. But yeah, nonetheless, I go back to pizza. That would be my recommendation now.
Well, that's an unfair advantage, competitive advantage when you can do that, right? Now, you already are, in my opinion, bridging to the next question that came up, which is there are really bad enterprise architects out there. There are a majority which are pretty good, and there are very few who are great. What does greatness looks like when, in terms of an enterprise architect? What does it look like when you work with enterprise architects that are at the
Oh,
greatness level? What is their differentiator?
well, I think it's me. Yes. So what does it look like? Yeah, well, no, I was joking. There's plenty of far better looking enterprise architects that are more qualified and skilled. But okay, what does it really look like? Well, it's the conduit, isn't it, between technology and the human emotion and all of the good stuff around psychology that makes that technology useful for people. What's the utility, the purpose for that? So it's really that conduit that I think enterprise architects that are successful manage to blend and be able to transform at that point something that's an emotional requirement into something that's technologically not just viable, but something that actually adds value going backwards again. So it's not always easy to do. So I think if you come from a background that is development, no bias here, of course, because that's where I came from, it really can add a lot because the people that you speak to that are eventually going to implement all of the crazy ideas that you have would certainly appreciate a level of affiliation with what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. And of course, having an engineering mind allows you to leverage technologies that are currently there, but also in the future in a different way than if you hadn't had that experience. So if there's any enterprise architects out there that are not developers or come from that background, I certainly encourage them to do lots of hello worlds and get into that environment. And the other part, not to be dismissed, is that there is a huge impetus towards being technically gifted. That's for sure. I mean, why not? I mean, that's what I just said earlier. But you have to be really connected with people, because essentially you must influence people and be influenced by them in order to reach the goals that you're trying to reach, not just for yourself, but of course for the company. And it's sometimes overlooked in this world of 20 releases of the latest version of Python, for example, or an app and so on. It's also centered around technology and what it can do. But underlying that, there's a human element. And I think really, if you've got a blend of both, then usually those people I've seen be quite successful.
Terrific. Rakesh, what a pleasure to have you with us. Final words of wisdom for our audience today. So, as those who are accelerating their culture, business, and digital transformation, what would you suggest that they keep in mind as they go on this journey to increase the likelihood of success on their own transformations?
What I would suggest this is that you should really, really try and improve on your presentation skills. I've certainly tried to improve mine, and that's added a lot. Try and be better with the dad jokes. I think they can be a little bit better and fine-tuned. But also do this. Be a student for eternally, for the rest of your life. Keep on learning new things. Keep on looking out to the future. Embrace them and enjoy them. And if there's one last dad joke I can have, it will be this: is that I've been considering making a movie about data and all of those good things that architects do, but I just can't think of a sequel. I'll leave you
That's
with
excellent.
that.
Rakesh Patel, thank you so much for sharing your expertise, your insights, and your dead humor with our global audience today.
Thank you, Jose, and thank you everyone that's had the misfortune of listening to me for the last hour. Have a good day.
Not at all. Thank you so much. Fantastic review from a real practitioner and leader of transformation. So thank you, Rakesh. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Rakesh Patel with a wealth of knowledge and cross-industry insights sharing with us today. So this completes our day 2 of Enterprise Architecture Live. So let's take a quick preview of what's happening tomorrow. Tomorrow we're going to wrap up starting at the same time, 9 a.m. US Eastern time, whatever time zone that is around the world for you. We're going to kick it off with Sandeep Dumad, who is Director of Enterprise Architecture for S&P Global Ratings. And he's going to talk about utilizing EA and business capability modeling to drive strategy and strategic technology investments. After Sandeep's presentation, we're going to welcome Lee Bogner, who is the Global E-commerce Enterprise Architect and Innovations Strategist for Mars. And it's not the planet, okay? It is the company. And he is going to talk about enterprise architecture framework for value creation using what he calls digital ventures for innovation. So that will be followed by another tremendous practitioner. We're going to have Brent Kadziorsky, who is the head of learning strategy and innovation at Shell. And Brent is going to be with us talking about the intelligent enterprise and the next generation operating model in the era of automation, building enterprise architecture for today and tomorrow. Brent is a leader in an organization that has been transforming itself at a global level, is any scale, and has tremendous insights from his journey at Shell to share with us. And we are going to finish the day and the conference tomorrow with Bobby Sudarshan. And Bobby Sudarshan is a leader at DAGO or Diageo. I can never remember how to pronounce the name of the company, but it is a British multinational beverage company that with its headquarters in London, but operates in more than 180 countries, produces with manufacturing operations in 140 sites around the world. And it's the world's largest distiller, and until like 2017, when a Chinese company I think may have overtaken them in that year. But it's 28,000 employees, and they're in this transformation on the culture, business, and digital transformation journey. And Bobby is the enterprise architecture leader for the company at a global scale, and he's going to be sharing the journey and insights with us. So tomorrow we're going to have it packed with real leaders and practitioners who are implementing digital transformation and enterprise architecture at scale in their organizations. Great sessions with great leaders sharing their practical insights and knowledge directly with our global audience. So again, thank you for being with us today. Thank you for your terrific engagement throughout. For those of you who want to ask additional questions, engage with the speakers and other participants post-conference, check out the LinkedIn under my name. And I'm going to be posting a short update soon after we wrap up here today. And feel free to ask questions, comment, thank the sponsors for allowing us to have access to all this wealth of information at no cost at a global on a global basis. So for now, I'm saying goodbye, wishing every one of you a great rest of your day, wherever you are in the world. Thank you, and I hope to see you back tomorrow.